Everybody, I'm Coach Amy. Today we are going to be doing a technique talk. We're talking about freestyle. If you have any questions afterwards, please shoot me an email. If you have any questions specifically about your swimmer and how this can pertain to them, please contact your lead coach. So here we go. Um, so we're going to be talking about freestyle, specifically breathing and tempo, and how that applies to your freestyle, just some different themes that go along with those things. So some buzzwords and terms for you guys to remember: bilateral breathing, balance, crossing over, entry, whether that be narrow or wide, distance per stroke, stroke rate, stroke count, and tempo. So, talking about those things, we're really going to work on how those two work together, which they work together pretty frequently, actually. How making some changes to how you're breathing and your tempo and stroke rate can prevent some injuries. And then how can these changes make you a faster swimmer, which is on all of our minds, I'm sure. So, freestyle breathing, we teach bilateral breathing at RSC. And when I say that, I mean breathing to both sides, so breathing to your left as well as the right. Typically, that's a every three pattern during practice. Sometimes we'll work on some breath control, breathing every five, just to set it up for some shorter races. We will have kids that'll adopt a single side breathing at a certain time. Couple reasons why that happens. One, they're mimicking typically a high level athlete. And then the other reason sometimes that adjustment is made is there's an assumption that it's easier or faster. So we're going to kind of go and debunk some of those. So while taking some pointers from high level athletes isn't wrong, and in some place it can be pretty beneficial, some of the techniques that those athletes are using have been developed over time. So with a lot of these things, making these adjustments need to happen after you have a really good foundation of great technique. And so we have to remember that a lot of those athletes have been swimming 15, 10, 20 years. So they've been really finding their craft for a long time. So those are things that they didn't really change until their technique was really sound. And then the other thing with the easier thing or feels faster, you typically, when you breathe to one side, you probably are moving your arm faster, but that's probably because you're not pulling as much water. So we see that a lot with crossing over. I hear kids say a lot, well, it's faster. It's so much easier that way. It's like, well, sometimes easier isn't better. We want to be able to have a good resistance against our hands and our elbows and our forearm when we're swimming, because that means we're moving water. So back to some technique with the breathing. We want to have some balance. The more the better. So when we breathe to both sides, we're really balancing out all of those little side muscles, our lats specifically, and it's not really a little muscle, it's a pretty big one. We use that muscle a lot when we swim, and especially when we breathe. That's really where that arm is moving on that opposite side. So if we're just breathing to the one side, we're really exhausting the lat on the one side and some of those other little muscles that help that arm swing around. So you want to make sure that we're not exhausting just one side of the body. And then sometimes, I'll see like this huge swing of the arm when we take a breath, whereas the other side doesn't do that. So it's a nice little stroke change as well. Crossing over, kind of touched on that already. You see this a lot when we breathe. It's a big stroke flaw. It's not efficient. It's extremely inefficient. When I say crossing over, I mean your fingertips, instead of being pointed towards the bottom, pushing that water just straight back, the hands turn to the side, and then we're not pushing any water anymore. If anything, we're pushing towards our body, which we don't want. So that's something that happens very frequently when we breathe. It's pretty rare that it happens when we're not breathing. There's obviously exceptions to every rule. That's a really big reason why we want to be breathing to both sides. Stroke efficiency. This is something that we're always working on, and we should always be working on no matter what level we're at, getting as much out of each stroke. And sometimes that's just as simple as just stretching a little bit farther, reaching a little farther back. But it's also just making sure that we're not crossing over, breathing both sides, maintaining that good body line, balancing on your stroke. Um, I have kids do stroke count stuff a lot, and it's always such a great underwater work because all of a sudden that's the first thing they do to minimize that stroke count, but we're not really working on stroke efficiency anymore. So um, something to think about when we're working on this. So I have a video here. This is Carolyn Joyce. Some of you probably know her. She was here a couple years ago visiting our team when the Super Bowl was out. Great freestyler. Really long, really high level career, and it really speaks because of her great technique that she has. She breathes both sides, really good head and body position, balance from one side to the other, good transfer of energy as she breathes and when she doesn't breathe. I think it just goes to show how important that technique is. Injury free. We say crossing over, we mean that from the elbow to the fingertips, we're reaching for the bottom, not reaching sideways. We don't cross over the middle line of our body. Hand stays wide throughout that pull. So we catch the beginning, on that water. Head position. Fingertips down again. So moving on here, we're going to talk about how do we fix those flaws. So how do we fix things? Again, a lot of this stuff, these are really bad habits. So I hope that we all know that some of these things take a while to fix. Sometimes it'll take a year, maybe longer. Sometimes it's a quick fix. But to make sure that we are making some new habits, you really need to kind of be on top of it. So using a circle, that's a really good way to just take everything out of the equation. So we're just focusing on the actual technique, what our arms are doing, how our body's moving, keeping that good balance and head and body position. Counting your strokes. Again, I kind of touched earlier on that crossing over being really inefficient. So if you're doing that, you're probably going to have a pretty high stroke count. So counting your strokes, trying to work on getting that average to be a little lower. And then counting your strokes at different points in time and practice. So counting it during warm up, counting it during a drill set, counting it during your main set, counting it during cool down, give you a good kind of feel for where you're at when you're working on different things. And just kind of keeping those numbers as close as possible. Within about 3 strokes would be a really nice ballpark. But some of you are probably, when you start doing this, probably going to be a little bit more erratic with how many strokes you're taking per length at different times. Another thing that I like to work on for some efficiency is paddle work. I like the Stroke Maker paddles. They have a good shape. They have a nice point, which is really what we're working on when we entering with the middle of our hand, and keeping those fingertips down. The nice thing about these is that if you are pulling in the wrong way, that paddle is going to move. So it'll kind of twist. Maybe sometimes it'll pop off. If it does that, that means you're not keeping that resistance against the paddle. You're not pushing your hand in the correct way. So it's a nice, just kind of instant reminder that something is amiss. So once you have all that really good technique down, adding some tempo work. Again, this is sometimes a little bit more advanced. I don't really start saying it's something to focus on until maybe the 11, 12, 1 group, and then maybe the 13, 14, 1 group and above. So something a little bit more advanced, again, once you get that good stroke work down, then kind of adding in some tempo work. And when I talk about tempo, stroke rate, those two things go hand in hand. They can kind of be used interchangeably. As simple as possible, it's just how fast are your arms moving. And then with that, we can talk about efficiency. As your stroke rate increases, meaning the more strokes you're taking, you're going to lose efficiency. There's a fine line, obviously, between your stroke rate being too high, where you're not really efficient, and then where you're super efficient and your stroke count is low, but your stroke rate is low as well, so you're not really going very fast. So kind of working on finding what your good, happy medium is. Tempo count. So how do we measure this? So the coaches will use a stopwatch. It's a really good, quick way to get stroke count reads. And then the swimmers will use a tempo trainer to kind of adjust their stroke count and stroke rate to a specific tempo. Tempo and freestyle, pretty big range, especially with different abilities and ages. In my 13, 14, 1 group, on the low end, we have people that hang out in the 0.54, so they're taking a stroke every 0.5 seconds, so about 2 strokes per second. And then on the really high end, 0.9, so taking a stroke about every second, so a little bit slower. On the tempo, not necessarily a bad thing, it's just where those ranges are. So here we have a really good visual video, and then we'll kind of discuss in just a moment here.
The fastest start again. Called for a 9.8 and also but it's Dressel all the way. 8.48. He's for the first 45. And he has a body leg on the field. Caleb Dressel, the world at his feet. And he is 17. 3. Coming home with a 9. Faster going out. He somehow dropped another 2 tenths off of his.
So obviously a pretty exciting swim there. I remember when this happened, all of us coaches were just geeking out. But super fun to watch. I'm sure we'll see a lot of other athletes over the years go under 18, maybe under 17. Maybe it'll be Dressel. But some cool things breaking down that race. So he's taken 8 strokes on the way down. He's taking 11 on the way back. So pretty low stroke count for a 50. Compared to, other swimmers, but, again, he's a big guy, lots of good technique there, even though he is kind of hacking away and those arms spinning. But the other thing that's really cool to watch when he swims is how dominant he is underwater. He's under the water 12.5 yards on the way down and on the way back. Pretty impressive there. Tempo. His tempo throughout the race is between 0.4 and 0.5. And it's pretty consistent there. He doesn't really vary too much. It's pretty consistent the entire way until the end, where the tempo starts to get a little quicker. So a little closer to that 0.42, 0.41. But that's as he's fatiguing, just to maintain that speed. Breathing pattern. So the one thing that's really cool is how consistent he is with that tempo. And that's because he doesn't breathe. So he doesn't take any breaths the entire swim. Not something I'd recommend for most of our swimmers, something that you want to build towards, again, under your coach's observation and instruction. So one last swim I kind of wanted to go over just to give us another side of the coin. We're going to go over Kieran Smith's 500 free this year. He broke the American record, win a 4:06. Pretty impressive swim. So a couple of things that are really cool about this swim. He took the fewest amount of strokes ever in a competitive 500. If you watch the swim, you can find it on SwimSwam. He's taking 10 strokes per length. Pretty low stroke count, the entire 500. That's about 4 meters, if not more, each stroke he takes. So pretty good distance per stroke there. Stroke rate, tempo, actually actually kind of a slower stroke rate. He's between 0.75 and 0.9, and that's just depending on when he breathes. So a little bit more variation between the stroke counts, or sorry, the stroke rates for him, because he does breathe to one side. And there's kind of a weird hitch in his stroke. This is definitely an area of improvement that he could be making, because he's definitely really consistent with his stroke rate there. Secret weapon. This will be talked about next week with Lauren on her talk. His underwaters. Really, really impressive, especially for a distance swimmer. He spends nearly a minute under the water for the swim. So that 4 minutes, 1 minute of it is under the water, and only 3 minutes he's actually swimming. Huge advantage he has over the field. His feet, and then sometimes it's hip, but sometimes it's between his hip and his heels are getting past the flags off every single wall. So he's out about 7-8 yards every single push off. So that lowers the stroke count, so we can have some more energy to keep that good stroke rate, that good distance per stroke throughout the entire 500. So super important thing to add, no matter what event you're swimming, whether you're doing the 50, 500, or even the mile. So that's it for me today. So this is where I got all of my videos, my pictures. I want to make sure that I'm citing my sources like a good researcher would do. Next Tuesday, you'll be hearing from Coach Lauren. She'll be talking about backstroke and underwater. So hopefully you guys tune in for that one, and we will catch you later.